All right, and we should be live on my channel.
Okay.
Welcome everyone to this session with Jimmy Song. Welcome, Jimmy, and we also have box mining.
Yeah.
And welcome to you as well. And we will just chat around for a few minutes before we get into the actual session, so that more people can join.
Same here. So I am starting live right now, and I'm going live on my channel too. So welcome, Jimmy. Welcome, Ivan. And I
Thank you.
The most important thing is we need to make sure the volume is okay. So it's just my volume relative to your volume. So yeah, should be hopefully okay.
Seems fine to me, but I don't know. You guys figure it out.
Yeah, we have to ask the channel. That's because mostly yeah, I can't watch this either. I can't listen to the stream. Ivan, you can actually listen to the stream, right? Because if I listen, then it will actually go into the stream.
Yeah, sure. So I can take a look.
Awesome. So we're gonna start at exactly 9 o'clock.
Awesome. Do you have like a chat window for YouTube or something that I can look at? Just in case?
Yes,
Right.
we do. You can come to. I'll send it to you on Skype.
Yeah, sure. All right, there we go. And
you can see a giant head.
Yeah.
So it's actually funny. People are asking me whether it's 3 a.m. in Sweden, but currently I'm actually in London, guys. And in London it is 2 a.m. and I am at the office where I work, and we have the security guy downstairs, so it's a bit suspicious of what's going on here. But Jimmy, so where are you based currently?
I'm in Austin, Texas.
Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
And there is 8 p.m. over there, right?
Yeah. Well, it's about to turn 8 p.m. Yes.
And Michael, you're in Hong Kong. What time?
Yeah, it's 8 a.m. here, so it's completely.
Yeah. Your viewers should all know that that coordinating this is not easy. So, props to you guys.
I think we had to like ask each other like what time zone are you in, and we have to calculate everything. It's
yeah.
It's like the most inconvenient 3 time zones possible. But yeah, that's great though. I'm glad to be on the show with you guys.
Thank you so much.
So Michael, should we start?
Just give you a sec. So 2 more minutes. I'm gonna be a time Nazi here, and start promptly at 9 o'clock.
But it is actually 2 o'clock a.m. for me. But maybe my clock is wrong.
Oh wait. Maybe my clock is wrong. Okay. So I'll start then. So what I'm gonna do? So I'm gonna introduce the format as well. So the format for this is we're gonna ask Jimmy some questions. The questions are available on the bottom, and then we're gonna do some questions and answers after. So we won't do. I kind of interrupt the main questions, but we'll try to get as many questions here and answered as possible. I will cut this a little bit to a shorter video. So if anyone wants to watch a shorter version, then I'm gonna cut it after we finish the stream. So with introductions first. So I'm Michael. Ivan is also another YouTuber, and Jimmy is a very prominent writer for Bitcoin, and also a Bitcoin developer as well.
Yes.
So Ivan, do you want to? Okay, so let's go introductions first. Jimmy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm a blogger. I'm a developer. I'm an entrepreneur. I've been doing Bitcoin for a while now. I got into it in like 2011. So this is my 6th year. It's kind of crazy how time flies by. It seems like it should be very young, but it isn't. Anyway, yeah, I currently work as principal architect at Paxos, otherwise known as ItBit. That's a Bitcoin exchange based out of New York.
Awesome. And my name is Ivan. You on my channel, of course, know me, but you on Box Mining channel, I do YouTube videos about blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and technology. I myself am a programmer. I currently work as an iOS developer in London. And very nice to be here with Jimmy and Michael from Box Mining.
Awesome. And my name is Michael. I do YouTube and also develop video games. So it's kind of like my thing to do daily cryptocurrency updates, and I also make video games on the side as well. So let's get started with the interview. So let's start with why do we even need Bitcoin scaling in the first place? What is this whole thing about? Because this topic would be SegWit activation, but what is this whole problem? What is the problem here, Jimmy?
Well, so yeah, this is a much more complicated question than it seems on the surface. I like from a very basic standpoint, fees used to be something very close to zero, and it's been going up, and people have been complaining about it because if you're sending $5 and your fees are like 50 cents or $1, that's a significant percentage of the transaction, and that kind of sucks. And that was sort of like the beginning. Blocks were getting full. There was a 1 megabyte limit that Satoshi put in there back in like 2010 or so, and it's been there ever since. And it's a little bit frustrating if you're trying to get a transaction in, and you put something like a 25-cent fee, and it doesn't confirm for a while, and it wasn't working quite the same way that it was in previous years. And that was really the beginning of the scaling debate. And sometime around 2014, this topic became sort of the topic du jour in Bitcoin circles. And it's sort of, it's crazy to think that we've been debating this for 3 years, but we really have. And there were sort of two solutions put forward. One was, just increase the block size to 2 megabytes. The other was a very innovative and interesting way to do it via something called SegWit, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. But the essence of the debate comes to, how can we put more transactions, or how can we increase transaction capacity on the network? Largely because Bitcoin's getting more popular, and that's really where we're at.
And as you mentioned, Jimmy, SegWit is one solution, one possible solution to all of this. So if you would describe as simple as possible, what is SegWit? And without getting into too much of technical details, how would you describe it as simple as possible?
I don't know if it's possible to describe it without some technical aspect to it. But if you think about sort of like Bitcoin as sort of a giant ledger, and when you send money from one point to another, if I'm giving Michael some money, and in like a traditional bank, I would maybe write a check to him, right? And I would sign the check, and he would see it, and then the bank would debit my account and credit his account. Well, in Bitcoin, you have something very similar. You have transactions. I have certain transactions that I own, and I can sort of sign those over and create new outputs that I can give to Michael. That process of signing on a normal check, the actual part where you sign isn't very big, right? It's like small corner of it. In a Bitcoin transaction, you can sort of think of it as like taking up like half the check, okay? And if you think of blocks as like a fixed size box where you can only fit a certain number of checks, if you could sort of cut the checks in half, you can sort of fit more checks in there. That's essentially what we're doing. The signature part of the check it takes up a significant part of the transaction. So what SegWit does is it sort of takes that away and puts it somewhere else. You can always verify it on your own. But you can fit more transactions, because you only have to see the signature once, and then you can sort of throw it away. And that's what segregated witness is. It's putting the signatures in another place and allowing more checks to fit in the box.
And so if we now take this to a more technical level, what kind of protocol changes need to happen in order to make this happen? And how can that affect the community?
Right. So from a non-upgrade, well, first of all, SegWit is something called a soft fork. So that means that it doesn't require everyone to upgrade. You only need some nodes that want to utilize this functionality to upgrade. And that means that that not everyone has to upgrade, so it has to be backwards compatible. And that means that everybody else that didn't upgrade sort of has to see something similar. And that's where a large part of the coding changes for SegWit are, is sort of like network messages. If you're sort of an old node, you'll get one set of messages. If you're a new node, you get another set of messages. So for example, blocks are communicated to old nodes as under the 1 megabyte limit. But to newer nodes, to ones that have upgraded, it's going to look like anything from, anything up to 4 megabytes. And it can be, and this is why, core developers keep saying SegWit is a block size increase, because to a new node, when they get a serialized version of the block, it's actually like 2 megabytes or something bigger. And that's, it's just that the old nodes get communicated at 1 megabyte, and that's largely what the coding changes that are required. We are also sort of utilizing anyone can pay and all these other technical details, but I mean, essentially that's what it comes down to.
That's a really great description, actually, because this is actually, we need to go down into simple terms. So, okay, we see that this is removing a huge checkbox, a signature box, making everything smaller. Okay, now that we have all this cool technology, how do we actually upgrade the network? What's the process for that?
Yeah, so that's outlined in something called BIP9. BIP stands for Bitcoin Improvement Proposal, and this was BIP9 has been utilized for a bunch of other things like check sequence verifying, check lock time verifying, a bunch of other upgrades. But basically what it does is it says, hey, if you're mining a block, please tell us if you're ready for this upgrade. And they flip a bit. There's a bit assigned in the version field. And for SegWit, it's bit 1, which is not bit 0. Bit 0 is the rightmost one, and bit 1 is the one next to that. And basically, you signal that bit and say, hey, we're ready. And at once 95% of a 2016 block difficulty adjustment period says that they're ready, then there's another 2016 blocks where everyone, the remaining 5% presumably, has a chance to go upgrade, and then after that it's enforced, and that's how it's supposed to be done. Unfortunately, with SegWit, it's gotten to the point where it's only about 30 or 40% were signaling readiness, and thus, it wasn't getting activated. And this is where all this drama around user-activated soft fork and BIP 148 and BIP 91 even, and the New York agreement all come in.
So it's essentially like if you're an iOS developer, you're kind of trying to upgrade to the latest version of iOS, and everyone has to upgrade. See, that's the thing with the network. Everyone has to upgrade. So what we're saying is 95% of people have to upgrade before it gets locked in, before it becomes the law, right? So
yeah. Well, 95% of miners,
yes.
And it's backwards compatible, so not everyone has to upgrade. It's just sort of a courtesy to the miners saying, hey, like, once 95% of you are ready, then we'll trigger. And that's sort of what they chose for BIP9. It's a very conservative, very consensus-driven upgrade mechanism. But obviously didn't really work for SegWit, so that's where we are.
But so it's very interesting that you touch on this miner perspective. Well, if I'm a miner, why wouldn't I want to upgrade immediately to this new proposal?
Yeah, that's a great question. To some degree, sort of politics has come into it, and there are some miners that have been asking for 2 megabyte blocks and a hard fork, which is not backwards compatible, and they've been asking for it for a long time, and they just feel like their voices haven't been heard. There's a bunch of BIP proposals that have been made for hard forks to larger size blocks. That aren't really seeing the light of day, right? Like BIP 100, BIP 104, BIP 103, I think even 101 and 102. Most of those are just, larger block size solutions. No one's really championed them. Core doesn't seem really interested in merging any of them. So they've been very frustrated, and they've been using SegWit activation and saying, well, if you're not going to listen to us, then we're not gonna signal either. So that's kind of it's kind of become like this Mexican standoff with like both sides with guns to each other's heads or whatever. So that's where we've been for about 3 years. Yeah.
For 3 years, I thought it was only 1 year.
Well, the actual Segwit, but yeah, I mean, Hong Kong agreement goes back to early 2015, or is it 2016? But it's been around for a while. This debate, this sort of very acrimonious, and like I guess you can add like the censorship on our Bitcoin and all that stuff in there too. But it's been a very divisive community, I think, since this issue began, I think around 2014.
Oh, just horrible. So where are we at now?
Yeah.
So we have something called user activated soft fork, which sets a hard deadline on August the 1st. So what is user activated soft fork and what is this deadline?
Yeah. So user activated soft fork is sort of a large group of possible forks that you can do, and they're basically it comes from the premise that every user is sort of master of their own node, right? Like every user can accept or deny whatever transactions or blocks that come into their node. And it's true. Every user has the right to reject whatever transactions they want, accept whatever blocks they want, reject whatever blocks they want. The thing is, if you are master of your own node and you don't agree with anybody, it's not really useful. No one's gonna take your coin, or it's not very useful in a community sense, because it's a blockchain. You have to sort of have agreement on what the state of the world is before it's actually useful. So what user activated soft fork does is it sort of unionizes those nodes, if you will. It says, okay, we're going to band together and we're going to accept certain blocks, certain transactions, and we're going to reject certain blocks and certain other transactions. And that was the idea behind it, which developer who's pseudonymously called Shaolin Fry put on the Bitcoin dev mailing list sometime in March. Anyway, his idea was, hey, let's just do like a Flag Day user activated soft fork, and for Segwit. Unfortunately, Segwit was already sort of on the network, like as something that miners could signal. So that wasn't very compatible, and so they came up with BIP 148. And what it does is on August 1st, starting August 1st, I think midnight GMT, something like that, any block that does not signal for Segwit, which is bit 1, BIP 141 is Segwit, and bit 1 is the bit assigned to it. If you're not signaling for bit 1 and for a block, all these users and possibly miners would reject that block, and that would cause a soft fork. And that's the idea behind that. It obviously got some traction. There were people buying miners. There were, I don't know if you guys have watched Twitter, but there's a bunch of people with UASF in their name. Some of them with 148 in their name. This is what they were referring to. August 1st, I am one of those people that are going to reject those blocks. And there's a client that was released under the auspices of Luke Dash Jr., who's a core developer, obviously, one of the most prolific ones, obviously. And that was the idea behind it.
Mm-hmm. So now that we have mentioned Segwit and user access software, how would you describe Segwit 2x, and what does that come from? Because there's three parts, right, to this whole issue we're talking about.
Yeah. So Segwit 2x is sort of an attempt at a compromise. And this was something that Barry Silbert led right before Consensus 2017, which was in late May. That's industry conference. A lot of people go. A lot of people are going to be there at the same time. So, he sort of reached out to a lot of miners, a lot of exchanges, a lot of people, and he got them to agree to do some sort of compromise. And the compromise was, we'll activate Segwit first, and then within 6 months, we'll also do a 2 megabyte hard fork. And this isn't very different than, say, the Hong Kong agreement, which was supposedly agreed to like in scaling Bitcoin Hong Kong like a while back. But that that fell apart for a variety of reasons, and both sides accuse each other of sort of betraying it or whatever. But basically, Segwit 2x is very much a compromise solution that's taking that's doing SegWit first and then doing a hard fork second. And in their press release, they said, hey, we're going to use Bit4 to do this. And James Hilliard, who's a core developer, he decided, hey, if they want to do this safely, here's how I would do it. And that eventually became BIP91. And that got merged into the SegWit2x repository and is part of SegWit2x now. But the 2x part is sort of doubling of the block size. And that's happening sometime, it looks like in November, if things go according to plan.
So what we have is SegWit, which kind of makes every block more efficient by removing a signature. Then we have what the miners want, which is to increase the block size. So technically, SegWit2x is a compromise, but not everyone is happy about this. And
no.
So now we have a few competing ways to activate SegWit right now. We have SegWit, so BIP91, which is a precursor to SegWit2x. And we also have BIP141, I think, which is the SegWit activation BIP. And then we have the deadline coming up, which is BIP148, which is some shit has to be done by August 1st, or half the network will freak out and go crazy. So I think that's kind of a summary of the current situation and what we were at. Now, so things have been changing for a little bit. So these few days, we did have some exciting news that perhaps we're going to move forward and there's going to be a possible BIP91 like kind of activation sort of. Can you explain what's going to happen here or what's happening right now?
Yeah, sure. So it's important to note that BIP148, which is the user-activated stop fork, really rides on top of BIP141. And BIP141 is SegWit. And basically what BIP148 does is it forces every block to signal for BIP141. BIP91 is very similar to BIP148. And that's sort of the key here, is that it's almost exactly the same, actually. BIP91 and BIP148. The only difference is that BIP91 asks the miners to signal for it first. And once it reaches 80% of 336 blocks, then it enforces the exact same rule as BIP148, which is signal for SegWit, or we will not accept your block. And that's essentially what it does. Now, BIP91 or SegWit2x was supposed to be released July 21st, so a couple days from now. But I guess they were code complete a little bit early, at least that's what I'm hearing. And miners started to run it a few days early. So we're actually ahead of schedule versus what SegWit2x was supposed to be. But essentially what's happening is we started a new 336 block period. And in my article, I call those epochs just to sort of distinguish it from a difficulty adjustment period. We're in our current epoch started like last night, and we have something like 75% right now of block signaling, and we have like 144 blocks to go, 142 now, and 168 blocks to go. So we're roughly halfway through the current epoch. And we have about 76%. So to be able to get to 80% for this current epoch, we need something like 86% of the rest of the blocks to signal for BIP91 in order to lock in. Now, whether or not that's going to happen, I mean, I'm going to guess that it's not going to happen. But we have multiple epochs for this to trigger. So we have the next epoch, next 336 blocks after this epoch can get, if that can get 80%, then it'll be okay. If the epoch after that works, then it'll be okay also. All the way up to like July 29th or something like that. As long as we lock in about 56 hours before August 1st, we should be completely fine. And the timeline doesn't change very much. but yeah, that's what seems to be happening. A lot of pools like F2 pool aren't signaling yet, despite signaling, New York agreement. So we'll see what happens there.
Okay, so far we have a few opportunities to kind of all combine together, work together to lock this in. And there's a few windows for that. And now we're going to talk about something optimistic here first. So there's a lot of kind of fear being spread around this whole debate. And I do want to say that, a lot of it is kind of very fringe and outside opportunity. So let's focus on the positive first. So what's the most optimistic timeline for this? Like what can happen? What's the good things that can happen if things go well?
Yeah, so if BIP91 activates before August 1st, what happens is BIP148, because it's so similar to BIP91, what ends up happening is it does nothing, right? Like BIP91 front runs BIP148. And every block starts signaling for SegWit, and we probably get SegWit lock-in around like August 10th or so, or August, early August sometime. And then later in August, we're going to get SegWit activation, at which point anyone can send and receive SegWit transactions along with all the goodies. 3 months after that would be the hard fork, but like generally that would be the optimistic timeline, is late August, like around August 23rd, 24th, maybe even a little earlier than that. That's when we would start seeing SegWit transactions on the network. Yeah.
But so if that is successful, what are your predictions when it comes to the network capacity if we compare it to current capacity and with SegWit?
Yeah, so early on, I don't think it adds that much capacity, because you need to be spending SegWit transactions in order to see the savings, right? Like you have like sort of like new form checks where you don't need to sign it on the same piece of paper; it's on a different piece of paper. Those new form checks don't come in until people actually create these SegWit outputs. So that's going to take some time to do, and that but eventually, what you get is around a network capacity of 2 megabyte blocks, or the equivalent thereof from sort of the previous. But you need more SegWit transactions in order to realize those gains, and we'll see how the network responds. Certainly, there's a lot of motivation to use SegWit transactions because you can have savings on the back end when you actually spend these outputs. But we'll see how the market responds. But that's a hard thing to predict without sort of knowing how people use Bitcoin and how they will use Bitcoin once these things come on.
Yeah, and so that being said, we've talked about the most optimistic scenario. What are your failed scenarios? What can go wrong, like really wrong?
Right. So if BIP91 fails to lock in or activate by August 1st, then you have the user activated soft fork. And at that point, I think you see a fork there. And Bitmain has said repeatedly, if there's a user activated soft fork, we're going to hard fork. And it looks like Bitcoin ABC is sort of their master plan for the hard fork. Bitcoin ABC is a hard fork. And that would cause 2 Bitcoins. And I think everyone panics. A lot of exchanges aren't ready for that. I think Coinbase recently said that if there's a hard fork, then we're just going to ignore it. But that's kind of really scummy, right? Because if you own Bitcoin before the fork, you should have equal amounts of Bitcoin on both sides of the fork. But they're just saying, well, we're just going to seize one side we don't really like, or something like that. This is why it's very important to control your own private keys and not leave it on an exchange like Coinbase. But yeah, so that could end up sort of causing all manner of chaos after August 1st if this doesn't go through. I think it would be very unsafe to transact in any way on either chain, just because there's wipeout risk in both chains. And there's replay protection things that you have to worry about. That's if you do transaction on one chain, it might be valid on the other. Although, like if Bitmain like forks to Bitcoin ABC, that won't be a problem because there's like replay protection built in and things like that. But yeah, there's a whole host of very bad scenarios where not only the price tanks, but like confirmation times like double or triple, maybe even like lengthen to days on one side of the chain, and that would be really terrible. And I mean, not to scare people, but this can get really, really hairy really fast.
That's insane. So basically, we possibly have a chain split where we split Bitcoin in two things, very much like what we've seen with Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. But now, because it splits, it's like the Titanic splitting, basically. There's going to be a lot of other disasters that can come out of it as well. For example, just if you send transactions, it can actually happen on both chains in both worlds at the same time. It's going to be absolute anarchy. So it's pretty much the end of, like, it's really horrifying, but at the same time, I do have to say that we have lots of opportunities to avoid that before August the 1st. So that being said, we actually have quite a few windows. I think in your latest article, we have quite a few windows to lock in either BIP 91 or 141. So before that, we can actually preview what's going to happen. And if things really go to hell, and we can see that all these windows are missed, then we really need to back up our private keys and not send transactions. I think that's a practical outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. You shouldn't keep your money or Bitcoins on exchanges anyway. That's just like asking to get hacked or whatever. And you guys both know the history of Bitcoin exchanges is, if they haven't been hacked yet, they probably will be in the future. So like, you just have to be very careful and hold your own money. So that's something that you should be doing anyway. So this may be a catalyst for you to go do it right now. Go buy a Trezor, go download Armory, go do whatever to secure your own coins. It can go to it can be very bad. A lot of these scenarios, I mean, you asked for sort of the worst case scenario. That is sort of the worst case scenario, but at least in my mind, they're not very probable, largely because there are ways around it, and we do have multiple epochs where we can lock in BIP 91 and we can sort of avoid a lot of this drama. So at least for me, I'm more optimistic than pessimistic at this point, at least for the short term.
Awesome. So I think we covered few of the major questions here. So we covered the optimistic scenario, the failed scenario. We also covered what everything is, why we're doing this. So now we have a little bit more freedom to ask questions. And I think this is a time where we're going to open up the questions to the audience that's watching. I have around 600 people watching on my channel. How many do you have, Ivan?
Awesome. Let's see. I have 359. So you are beating me this time.
Let's get to 1,000 combined. Come on.
Exactly. Our powers combined. 1,000. Here we come.
Exactly. But so we actually have one more question that we have prepared, and that is more of the practicalities. So what should you do in practical terms when August 1st is approaching and we have all these events going on? You said that you have a large amount of money in Bitcoin. How do you protect yourself?
Well, first of all, get it off the exchanges. And this is something that you should be doing anyway. There's a lot of people that can tell you stories of losing money at Mt. Gox and a bunch of other places that are happy to tell you, go back up your own keys, be your own bank. Don't trust other people. Like that should go without saying. But generally, if you can help it, try not to have any transactions after August 1st if there's any sort of disaster looming, and that should protect you. If you have your private key, they're yours. This Bitcoin is a bearer instrument for that reason. Whoever owns the private key owns the coin. So you don't have to worry about a split or whatever. You'll own the same amount on both. It's kind of like two locks, and your key works on both chains. So don't worry about it. As long as you want to be a holder, which I presume most of your viewers are. So you should be okay as long as you don't transact after August 1st. Although if you have to transact, there are some things that you should know about replay, wipeout, and all this other stuff that you have to be very, very careful about.
cool. So are these scenarios, replay and wipeout, covered in any forms? We'll links an article below or something? Is that a good way to cover that?
Yeah. So I wrote about it in a bunch of articles, and it's tends to be a little bit more technical just because of what replay and wipeout are. But basically, if you don't transact, you don't incur any risk. But if you do transact, your transaction might sort of be taken back, which is kind of a scary scenario. But somebody might have a longer chain that doesn't include your transaction, in which case it just kind of goes away. And if you're like an exchange or something, or if you're a merchant and you just receive Bitcoin and you ship them the product, well, you're and the transaction reverses, well, you're out of the product and you don't get any money. That kind of sucks.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah, so this is why you have to be very careful. And with replay, it's you meant to send on one chain, but the other chain also sends. So instead of sending like 50 of Bitcoin A, you end up sending 50 Bitcoin A and 50 Bitcoin B, which happened with Coinbase with the Ethereum split. They were sending out normal Ethereum, and people were replaying it and sending themselves Ethereum Classic as well. So they got like some significant amount more than they were entitled to, and Coinbase was out of a lot of money. I keep kind of picking on them, but they have sort of it seems like that was a problem for them, and it may be a problem going forward.
All right. Sorry. So I'll ask the question first, and then I'll give Ivan the next question. So that way we can take turns. So
Okay.
we covered the doom and gloom. So what happens? Okay. So with that aside, what happens after 3 months after August the 1st? So a lot of people are wondering, what's gonna happen next as well.
So it looks like Segwit will activate if BIP 91 goes through and everything else, as I put in my article. Segwit locks in around August 10th and activates around August 23rd. And the way Segwit 2x works is that about 3 months after Segwit activation is when the hard fork happens. And it's like literally written that way in the code. There's like certain number of blocks that roughly corresponds to 3 months or 90 days actually. And then it says, okay, on that block, we will fork to 2 megabyte blocks. And that is going to be, around like late November, maybe a little bit earlier, like November 18th, I think is what I put in the article. But right around then is when we're going to have a hard fork of all the Segwit 2x people. And that, at least according to the New York agreement, seems to be about 80% of the mining hash power or even more. So that's going to be fairly significant, but that said, there was an exchange between Mike Belshie and Matt Corallo. Mike Belshie is the project manager for Segwit 2x, and Matt Corallo is a core developer, and they were going back and forth on Twitter. And Mike Belshie seemed to indicate that if it helps, they might push out the hard fork date so that it could get merged into core. So who knows? That is a possibility. In which case, we maybe stay on one chain. And but as it stands, it looks like Segwit 2x is going to hard fork in late November, and that will be it.
That's cool. So we do have good things. We'll definitely see faster transaction times, hopefully, and less fees. So going forward, Ivan, do you have a question?
Yeah, so I have a question from Jonathan Mitchell on my channel. And it's very good, guys, that you're asking questions. Keep asking questions. This is really an opportunity for us to ask a Bitcoin developer. And so the question is there some way that we can see both versions of our Bitcoins when they split? How would you actually see the Bitcoin on the old chain and new chain, and maybe there's a third chain or something? How would you switch between those chains?
Yeah, and this is why like a fork and a split are just so terrible, because like basically every wallet developer, I used to be a wallet developer at Armory, and like every wallet is going to have to make two versions, right? Like the old chain A version and chain B version, and so on. Every exchange is going to have to do the same thing. every merchant is going to have to do the same thing. It like completely disrupts the entire ecosystem because everyone has to sort of handle both cases. But essentially what I would say is most likely there will be wallets that incorporate both. I don't know, maybe it's Mycelium or Bread Wallet or somebody. And you'll be able to see balances on both, and they'll incorporate replay and wipe out replay protection into it, and compose the transactions in such a way so that it's only valid on one and not the other, and so on. But there will be wallets, and if there isn't one, I mean, great business opportunity, right? Like great way to get your wallet out there. I'm sure guys at like Samurai Wallet, for example, would jump at the chance to, have show what balance you have on both and be able to handle both, or maybe Jack's wallet, or and there's a ton of wallets that handle Bitcoin. I'm sure at least one of them will be able to show you what you have on both. And I don't know, if you're a wallet developer, one thing that you might want to do is sort of advertise, hey, if there's a split, we're ready, and we're going to support both. And that way, you should use our wallet, and send your funds to this wallet so that we can, you're protected in case of a split, something like that. But to my knowledge, no wallet has sort of done that yet.
There's also another question, and this one is actually from me, and that is, so we're having these plans for the Lightning Network in the future, and Segwit is a prerequisite kind of to the Lightning Network. Why would you say that is? Why do we need to remove the signature from the blocks in order to make Lightning happen?
Okay, yeah. So there's something called transaction malleability, and that's being able to sort of change the transaction ID by doing certain things, and signature is one of them. If you can sign things multiple times, and the signature will be different every single time. Kind of like if you sign multiple checks, your signature will be slightly different, right? Like they're still the same signature, but and they validate the check sort of, but the actual bits are actually different, and that changes the transaction ID. And in order to work with the Lightning Network, you have something called a commitment transaction or a funding transaction that needs to go in before you can sort of do all the Lightning Network stuff. And that ID, the funding transaction ID, has to stay stable. If you have transaction malleability, then that transaction ID might change, and that causes some problems. And people can sort of hold Bitcoins hostage in sort of that funding transaction and things, which kind of make it bad. And what Segwit does is, since it sort of takes out the signature part, it fixes transaction malleability, and the transaction ID stays stable. And so you can do Lightning Network transactions without depending on it. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So basically, in order to open this channel in Lightning Networks, for example, if I want to open a channel with you, we would need this transaction that needs to be stable, right? And
the transaction ID of that transaction needs to be stable. Yes.
And without Segwit, that is currently not possible.
Yeah, I mean, you can still do Lightning, but that's what I kind of call crappy Lightning, because there's some risk involved in opening the channel, and you sort of have to trust the other party a little bit. But it can be done, but it's a lot easier with transaction malleability protection, which Segwit introduces.
And so what would be your forecast for the Lightning Network? When will we get it? Is it actually done already in code, or is it still in the development in the stage, or where are we on the timeline?
Yeah, so as far as I know, Litecoin, for example, has had Lightning Network transactions. So I believe it's possible. Now, whether or not it gets used is a whole different story, because you need software to do that, and you need wallets to support that. And like Segwit, once Segwit activates, that makes it a lot more stable and gives developers a more stable platform to work off of. So, but I mean, you still need software before it's actually useful. And there's a lot of little things with Lightning, like you sort of have to watch the other party to make sure that they don't cheat and things like that. And and in lieu of that, you need to, sort of make a third party sort of watch them for you or something like that. All those services and things don't exist yet. And there's a whole infrastructure that needs to be sort of built first before it becomes really useful. But, I mean, that's sort of the road that we're heading down. I don't know how long it would take. It really depends on sort of market demand and, developers willing to develop these infrastructure things first.
Shameless plug. We're trying to get Charlie Lee to come on as well sometime. So if you guys join me on Twitter, shameless plug. I'm trying to get that going. I'm definitely taking a few more questions about Segwit, and then I think we can move on to another topic. I think we just talk a little bit and chat a little bit as well. So if anyone else on the channel has any comments and questions about Segwit or the upcoming Bitcoin scaling debate, feel free to ask now. I'm definitely trying to take a look at the chat. There's a lot of going on the chat right now, so do forgive me if I'm a little bit slow here at reading the chat, but we can definitely have some questions coming soon as well. So I think, Ivan, do you want to ask the next question? I'm still looking at the chat.
I have another question from Kartnik Para Meswaran. So will there be a need to move to higher block sizes in the future? Why fix it currently with 2 megabytes? And so this is more of this proposal that we should go up to 2 megabytes. Why don't we go to 10 or 100 or something?
That's been debated for years, so I don't know how to answer that question really. Why do we need to do it? I mean, that's more a political question than a technical question, so I feel a little bit uncomfortable answering it. I'll just answer it as I don't know.
Unlimited here. Yes, no, that's too political, I think. Definitely not. Okay.
So Michael, do you have more questions?
Yeah, I think some things about fees, but the thing is, fees is actually not dependent on by the miners. So miners don't set the fees. So I'm going to answer the question set by someone else. So there was a question on my channel about, are miners just hiking up the fees for fun? Is this thing just determined by the miners? But actually, fees aren't determined by the miners. It's kind of like Uber. The more congested things are, the more people fighting to get an Uber, the more expensive you're gonna get. So it kind of like you can add an additional tip to the miners, and they're the greedy guys. They'll take the ones with the biggest tip and process them first. That's why it gets expensive, because everyone's just kind of fighting to get processed first. It's fighting for that super Uber.
Yeah, I will add though that it is possible as a miner, if you want to sort of game this out. You can flood it with a bunch of transactions of your own that have higher fees and do that. And they've been accused of this before. I have no idea if it's true or not, of sort of flooding the mempool with a certain level of fees and not mining any of them, but making it look like you're not going to get in unless you provide like $5. This would be like if you were able to hack the Uber service and make it look like there's a lot more passengers than there are. And so you get surge pricing or something. That it's possible. I'm not going to comment on whether or not it's been done, but this is something that miners have been accused of doing.
In fact, Uber has been accused of doing that as well. So great example.
Not a surprise, I guess. Yeah.
I have a question as well regarding BIP 91. So BIP 91 does not exactly mean Segwit 2x. I've heard that it's possible to actually kind of patch a Bitcoin core client to be BIP 4091 compatible. Is this true? Like, does BIP 91 have to be Segwit 2x?
Well, so first question and second question are actually a little bit different. So you can signal BIP 91 or BIP 4 in the version field of the block. Without running anything. You can change get block template and flip a bit and send it out to like mine on that and basically signal that way. And it looks like, for example, Ampool and BTC.com and a bunch of other miners are doing exactly that, because they're only signaling for BIP 91 and not also signaling for BIP 141, which is sort of the default in Segwit 2x. Now, you can do that with just Bitcoin Core, but like it really depends on like what you mean by BIP91. BIP91 encompasses a bunch of things, including rejecting blocks if they're not signaling for BIP 141 once BIP91 is activated, and that you can't do with just Core. You need a client that also has the full BIP91 code in there. Obviously, Segwit2x has that. But there's also sort of an alternative client that James Hilliard wrote, and it's only BIP91 on top of Bitcoin Core. And you can run that and essentially get all of the properties of BIP91 without any of the hard fork stuff that Segwit2x has. So there's a lot of options, and it's hard to know what software anyone is running. Although I do suspect that at least at this point, AntPoolBTC.com and a bunch of others are not running Segwit2x yet, because they're signaling for at bit 4 but not at bit 1. So that seems to be indicative for me that they're not really running Segwit2x yet. But it's entirely possible to run just BIP91 without the hard fork part and a bunch of other things.
Interesting. Okay, so it's possible that people can just put the signal out and not actually run Segwit2x. Cool.
Yes.
Okay. So now I would like to open questions up for any discussion topic. So I think we've pretty much covered Bitcoin, and I'm trying to look for questions here. It's actually one of the most interesting things is just how hard it is to actually read so many questions because there's so much going on in chat. So do forgive me for being slow. Yep, go on.
I have a question, Jimmy. So how would you start developing Bitcoin? Because many of my viewers, many of people viewing my channel are developers. And so if you know C++, if you know Java, you know some programming languages, how would you go about starting contributing to the Bitcoin project?
Do you mean Bitcoin Core or sort of any open source project that's related
Bitcoin Core? Bitcoin. Okay. Let's say Bitcoin Core.
Okay. Well, so first of all, Bitcoin Core is very well documented. There's a lot of documentation that you can go read in the Bitcoin Core repository. So there's a lot of READMEs about how to do certain things. So the main languages in the Bitcoin Core repository are C++ and Python. And Python is largely used for the testing infrastructure. It tests like a bunch of the RPC calls that Bitcoin D does and stuff like that. If you want to get started, I would start with just reviewing code. And this tends to be the bottleneck on Bitcoin Core is there's a ton of pull requests. It's very sexy to write code and have it merge into Core. And you can say, hey, I'm a Bitcoin Core developer. What's much harder is finding people to actually review your code, right? Like that's not very sexy. You don't get any credit for it. You just read code and make comments, or if the code looks good, you often just don't even say anything. So if you want to get involved, I would say start at the lowest rung, right? Like start with review. Review a bunch of stuff. You don't even have to comment. And Alex Morkos, who's a friend of mine from Chain Code Labs, this is how he got started. He's one of the more prolific Bitcoin developers now. He got started just reviewing a bunch of pull requests so he could just understand what the hell's going on with each pull request. And it might take you a while, right? Like you read a pull request, it's like 30 lines of changes, but it references all sorts of other things in the code that you might not understand yet. And you might have to go and learn like the basics of Bitcoin or elliptical curve cryptography, or like how transactions work or how the networking code works. There's a whole ton of stuff that you might need to understand in order to make a good review for a pull request. But that's sort of part and parcel of it. There's a whole Bitcoin developer documentation that David Harding is in charge of that I'm sure he would love feedback on. Go read that too. But yeah, I start with review, and if you're comfortable, maybe like look at some unit tests. Go tweak those to cover a few more test cases, add a little bit more line coverage, and at that point you can maybe start looking for cool things that you can do, or collaborate with some of these other developers. There's a very active IRC channel where you can discuss some of these ideas on Bitcoin developers or Bitcoin wizards or a bunch of other places. So there's a whole world of stuff out there. I also wrote an article for the company I work for, Paxos, just getting started in blockchain development, and it's just sort of helping you understand maybe some of the basic math behind elliptical curve cryptography. I have to write another blog post soon for my employer, so that can be finished. But it covers some like field math and elliptical curves in general, so you can at least have some math backing to understand what the hell's going on with signatures and things like that. So there's a lot of resources out there. You just have to, my advice is go to the Bitcoin core repository, read all the documentation you can, and start by reviewing pull requests and asking questions on IRC if you don't understand something.
That sounds extremely exciting, reading documentation. Just what I want to do every night. I have a very light-hearted question from David Manning. His question is, question for Jimmy. What is your skincare program? You look younger every day.
It might be because I just went on vacation. I came back from vacation literally like 3 days ago. And, I got a lot of sun. I got a lot of, I went to the beach. Went to Disneyland and all this other stuff. So maybe that was it. And maybe going on those rides made me feel younger or something. But thank you so much for your compliment. I've never really been complimented on my skin before.
I thought that was a fun question.
Great question.
I do have a question about cryptocurrency as well. Have you heard of IOTA? So it's a whole new way of kind of even just, it's not even blockchain really. It's cryptocurrency, but it's not blockchain. Have you heard of IOTA?
I think it's like directed acyclical graphs or something. I don't know that much about it. I just heard about it, and I know it's in like the top 20 on the crypto market cap, but that's about all I know. I do study interesting technologies that come out. I'm pretty familiar with Monero, for example, and what they're doing, some stuff on Decred, but I haven't looked into that particular project, so sorry.
Cool.
So, Michael, I have many comments on your cursor. That that you should remove the cursor from Jimmy's head. So currently, Michael is pointing his cursor all over, massaging your head.
Nice. He's pointing out my skin, I guess. Yeah.
There you go. We got your eyes right there. That obviously some great skin products. That awesome. Sorry about that, guys. I was trying to look through the comments and yeah. Okay, so this is a question I haven't asked at the start, which I should have asked, but how did you get into cryptocurrency in the first place?
Yeah, so I tell this story a lot, but basically 2011, I'm a tech guy. And back then, the site that I read the most was Slashdot, and I saw a story on there that said Bitcoin has broken $1, and I said, what is Bitcoin? What the hell? Why is it important that it's over $1? I read all the comments on it, and then I was like, okay, I really need to find out what the hell this is. And for the next 3 days, I found the white paper. I read it. I read through a bunch of, I think at that point I registered for like bitcointalk.com, which was pretty much the only place where you can find any information. And I was like, all right, you know what? I'm ready. I'm gonna put some money into this. And I was like, all right, so how do I get some for PayPal? And then I found out you can't get it for PayPal. And it was this really complicated process at that time to go and buy Bitcoin, where you had to go and register with Dwolla so you can transfer money to Mt. Gox, and then you can actually then exchange it, and then you can get it out of there. And it took like a week of validation, and I needed to put in my bank accounts and stuff. And I said, screw that. I'm not going to do this. And I was kicking myself 6 months later when Bitcoin went up to $30. And I was like, oh, crap, I should have bought this. And then it started crashing. So I was like, all right, you know what? I'm really getting in this time. I set up all that stuff, and I talked to my wife about it, and she's like, "You're not putting any money in this, are you?" But I lied to her and put a few $100s in. But yeah, it was, and like I actually didn't get the order filled until like late that year, and when it was a lot more money than like the dollar that I should have bought it at. But anyway, that's sort of how I got into it. I didn't actually start developing until around 2013 with the second bubble that happened, where Mount Gox went to 266 and there was a crash. After that, I was like, you know what? I'm a developer. I really need to learn this stuff, and I need to do this. And I ended up started programming for an open source project called Colored Coins. I don't know if you remember that, but I always sort of describe it as like a proto Ethereum, and not in small part because Vitalik Buterin was actually a part of the project at the time. And he wrote the white paper. We thought it wasn't very accurate. He said, "Screw you guys, I'm making my own coin," and Ethereum was born. So,
that's insane.
But that's kind of what happened. He was frustrated with sort of the limitations of what you could do on top of Bitcoin, which is what Color Coins was. Creating new assets on top of Bitcoin. And 3 years later, we have ICOs that are raising $80 million, right? Like it's kind of crazy what things have come to. But yeah, I started contributing to Colored Coins. With this guy named Killer Storm. He's still around in the community. He's part of a company there. And then I decided, hey, you know what? Like, I really enjoy this. I really believe in this. And I obviously learned a lot doing Colored Coins, and I decided to do it for a living. I worked for Monetas, Armory, now Paxos, and Itbit. So it's been a fun and interesting ride. It's kind of weird because I've only been working in this space, I guess, like 4 years, but it feels like I've been doing it all my life, if that makes sense. It's been a crazy and wild ride.
It's consumed you. It's become
it really has.
Exactly. And people were asking if for donations. Can people donate to your blog? Are you do you have a Bitcoin address up there?
Yeah, I've tried to not do that, though. Like, if people want to donate to me, I suppose I should probably put an address up there or something. I'm not doing the thing. I'm not really writing articles for money per se.
Awesome. That's great.
I'm mostly doing it so that the community will sort of go in a direction that I think is more palatable to me. So it is selfish still. But yeah, it's more because I have such a financial stake in Bitcoin that it's in my own best interest to make sure that Bitcoin goes in a direction that
to keep your $30 investment alive, right?
Hey, capitalism is awesome, right? Like, 'cause it aligns incentives in such a great way, right? Like everyone like wants to do the right thing because it's profitable for them, and that's great. I love that. That's one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin is, we're all incentivized to make this thing work, even if we hate each other's guts or whatever. And you don't have to like the people that are in the community, but if you see value in it, you can still work with it and make everything work.
And also, you jumped into this question, ICOs. What do you think of the current ICO climate?
I think most of them seem kind of scammy to me. I mean, a lot of them don't have a product. They're promising a product, and I don't know. The analogy that I think that sounds the most accurate to me is you're promising to open a restaurant and selling the food before you cooked a single meal, or have even a building to have the restaurant, right? Like it's just sort of like, we're gonna raise this money and we're gonna do this. Give us money. I guess it works with like Kickstarter and things like that, but I don't know. The economic model and the incentives don't necessarily look that great. that said, I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some ICOs that do well and actually produce things. I mean, if anything, just because they're going to get higher SEC scrutiny. Yeah, I mean, I do wonder somewhat about like the legality of it. Especially if it's more like a security or like. I have friends in the trading industry that are like, well, you can't really count like if it's a token that's that you can cash in for some good or service later in the future. That's sort of like that is kind of revenue. So you have to sort of pay taxes on it, and if you're not paying taxes on it, then you're going to get in trouble with the IRS. And there's just it just seems like a legal minefield to me.
Yeah.
And I just stay away from it. I haven't bought a single ICO. I don't plan to, and I don't know. I mean, it's possible that something else can come along, or if it's done in a very careful way, that it could work. And I hope somebody does do that. But at this point, I don't really. I don't know about it. And yeah, I remain very skeptical until I see some a good product, like a restaurant that serves good food or something.
But also this issue with scaling when it comes to Ethereum. Do you have any your own picture of how this can be in the future and the problems currently? How would you describe this Ethereum scaling issue today?
Yeah, I mean, the Ethereum blockchain, I think, surpassed the size of the Bitcoin blockchain a couple months back. And that to me is kind of amazing because they're a year older. They're only like a year and a half or 2 years old. And, like Bitcoin's like 8 years old, like it's been around a lot longer. And but then you might say, well, Ethereum just has more transactions. Actually, it doesn't. It just has a lot more bytes per transaction. So scaling is a much bigger challenge on Ethereum. Now, how are they going to solve it? They've been talking about sharding and doing all this other stuff. I remain skeptical of all those solutions until I see it. And I think that's the attitude that most people should have. Like you don't know how something's going to work in the real world until it actually is running. So who knows? I will say though that that block size just, I mean, Ethereum's blockchain just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And like with ICOs like just going crazy, I can't see that slowing down anytime soon. So yeah, I mean, they're gonna run into bigger problems faster than Bitcoin. So that would be my take on it.
Oh wow, sharding. Question for Ivan: when are you gonna start your own coin?
That's like the number one question I get since I started doing Solidity tutorials on my YouTube channel, and we'll see, guys. If there is a good solution that the coin will solve, if there is some valid use case, maybe in the future. But currently, I'm not there. I would say, but yeah, it's a very common question for some reason.
I think every YouTuber wants to make their own coin now. I think that's the thing, because you got the free PR right there. So
hey, can you blame them? Look at how much ICOs are raising. It's just like
exactly.
It looks like free money to you. I mean, yeah, ICOs. I guess I didn't say this before, but I want to add this in now. ICOs feel like just greed on every side imaginable, right? Like, the sellers are very greedy because they want to get as much money as possible. They're like raising these funds without any sort of cap. And the buyers are also extremely greedy because they think it'll pop 5 times and they can sell it and get out. And that just seems to me a very terrible recipe. And it's the exact recipe for a bubble. And from an economic standpoint, I can't see it lasting all that long. With that kind of money being thrown around.
Also, many people ask about EOS, and I think this topic is very interesting due to Mr. Larimer and his achievements with Steemit and BitShares. And EOS is a very, very ambitious project with very big goals. What is your view on that?
Well, their party was very interesting at Consensus. That was actually like the weirdest party I've ever been to in my life. That that was held by the EOS party was held by Brock Pierce, and he like hired all these performers that were going around doing weird things. Anyway, I kind of view the coin a little bit similarly. I don't really understand it, and I don't really understand the appeal of it. I mean, I get that Larimar's delivered several times, right? You know, like with BitShares and Steemit, and at least he releases code. It's not all vaporware, so that part is good. As far as the appeal of the actual coin or what it does, I kind of remain skeptical, largely because I read the prospectus and it said this coin is useless. Please don't use it for anything or think that it has any value before you buy it. I mean, Ethereum, I guess, said something similar. It's like a complete experiment. Please don't use it for anything other than an experiment. Before they did their pre-sale of Ethereum. So I don't know. I kind of remain a little bit skeptical of EOS. I don't actually really understand what they do. I guess that's part of the problem. Is I maybe I just don't understand enough. But that's my take on it currently.
Good take. It's crazy out there. I mean, like there's so many different projects. There's Tezos as well. I think a lot of people are talking about Tezos in the channel. But there's all these new things coming in, but a lot of them are either like not proven yet, or there's not even developed yet. So I think I'm definitely gonna avoid a lot of these what you think about Xcoin questions, because it's still very early on in terms of tech as well. So so I'll open more questions. If anyone wants to ask any more tech-based questions or fun-based questions, I'm taking a look at the channel. Yet again, I'm super slow at reading. I think maybe that is why.
Can I just say something? Can I just say something about like all these new coins and stuff? I want to point out that it is very, very difficult to make a coin from scratch, or get something out there that's very secure. I think for a lot of us developers, we're sort of used to web time, right? Like you can get an idea, have a functioning website that does something in like 2 or 3 weeks. And we're sort of in that mental space as far as how long things take. And we think that, okay, well, if I have an idea for a cryptocurrency that can do this, this, and this, it'll only take 2 or 3 weeks. And that is not the case at all. And I think we saw this with Ethereum, right? Like they raised a bunch of money. They didn't release for like 1.5 years because it takes a long time to create this stuff. And, even after the 1.5 years, they had like stuff like the DAO or whatever. There's a lot of things that you got to think about when you're doing software development. And I liken sort of like blockchain or like cryptocurrency development as more like an OS than it is a website. And if you think about Apple or Microsoft, these huge companies with hundreds and thousands of developers, they take 2 years to release a new version of an OS or to build an OS from scratch. And those are sort of the timeframes that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about these projects. It's not easy to come up with this stuff unless you're, basically taking core and like modifying a few parameters, which plenty of altcoins have seen fit to do. But, if you're building something from scratch and you have ambitions of doing like these really interesting things, you need a lot of development power. You need a lot of testing. You need a lot of this stuff that has gone into projects like Bitcoin. And you need to do it well in a secure way. Otherwise, you're going to end up screwing yourself. So, you need to be patient with this stuff, and you can't really, expect things to come out really quickly. And anyone that's telling you that is probably lying.
Exactly. I mean, I've been making games for a while, and we thought our first game we can make it in 3 months. Actually, 3 months we'll release our first game. Done deal. And it's got like the best graphics. It's got the best technology. We've been reading up on getting like the best plugins and everything into it. And that took like 2 years.
Yeah.
So eventually, yes, we eventually got there, but like when we're close to releasing, it was just bugs after bugs after bugs, and we're just like cleaning the bugs out, and it's ridiculous how long actually it takes to write good code. I mean, a lot of people are saying, oh, it's just 40 lines of code, but it's 40 lines of good code or something, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, and for you, it's like a bug. Oh, okay, customer has a bad experience, and maybe they get killed as in the game instead of like staying alive. With Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, you put in the wrong bug, you lose money, and that is horrible. So you like there's a standard for cryptocurrency and like sort of like financial applications or fintech that should be really a lot higher than even games or obviously much more than like websites. You have a bad web request, you see a 404 or something. That's not a big deal. You lose $100,000. That's a pretty big deal. So that you got to think in terms of like security, development. This is not easy stuff.
But so what is the process of testing new code? You mentioned the code reviews and you mentioned unit tests, but those feel still very basic when it comes to the whole community using the coin and transacting. So are there more steps to this testing pipeline?
Yeah. So there's integration tests, RPC tests, things like that that are written in Python. The unit tests are in actually C++ for Bitcoin Core. There's a whole test net, right? Like that you can test features on, and oftentimes they're released released much earlier than on the main net. And you can test the features, try all sorts of things, and people try to break stuff on testnet all the time, and that's sort of like releasing your code into the wild, so that can happen. And that's generally how it's been. And it gets there hasn't been sort of a catastrophic bug in Bitcoin for like 8 years now. So knock on wood, right? It's been pretty good.
Exactly.
Awesome. Ivan, how many questions do you have on your channel so far? So I'm just seeing how long we want to run this session for.
Yeah, I can ask several questions.
Okay.
I've seen a couple.
Do you want to limit to like 3 questions each, and that way we can get this session going, and then Jimmy can take a break before he.
I can actually take my last question right now. So this is a question from D. Mao Youssef. Would we see in the future the addition of smart contracts on Bitcoin? Would it ever be possible without doing a hard fork or developing it from the ground up?
Yeah, good question. I don't know if it would be on the main chain, but there's certainly a lot of potential in side chains. And if you don't know about side chains, it's a really cool technology. Essentially, what you do is you have a separate chain that's very closely linked to the main chain, and it trades sort of on a peg basis. So like 1 Bitcoin on the main chain is always 1 Bitcoin on the side chain. And you can have all sorts of technologies on it. Paul Stork, he has a bunch of papers on drive chains, for example. Blockstream has something called Liquid that's being that they're trying to utilize to make like exchange to exchange transactions much faster. But RSK is planning to bring smart contracts to a Bitcoin sidechain, and that would be the closest thing. And it would be actually like actual Bitcoins being traded on there. And that opens up a whole set of technologies that we can possibly have. And some people say if you have sidechains, why do you need altcoins, right? Like you have all the same capabilities. And that may be true too. So who knows? But that's a very exciting technology. I think I wrote an article a while back about how you could potentially use that to enable scaling instead of going the 2 megabyte or Segwit route. You can just have side chains that did the same thing, and like just let users choose, and that would have been one way to do it. Unfortunately, that didn't seem to get that much traction, and we're sort of on the Segwit 2x train now, and it looks like we've almost reached the point of no return. So that's where we are. But yeah, there's whole host of technologies that we can try out with side chains, and that seems to be on its way in the next year or so.
And actually, I know that I've seen this question several times before, and now that you touched on it, when it comes to on chain and side chain scaling. So you mentioned that it didn't get much traction, but could you expand more on the differences and why we should choose this or that?
Yeah. So drive chains are really interesting, and Paul Stork has he's written a ton on it, and I would encourage you to follow him on Twitter and read his papers. But basically, drive chains are sort of an automated side chain. You don't have to really trust anybody, and well, other than some miners, but there's a whole that gets a little more complicated. But you could have whatever features you want on a specific side chain. And you could experiment and you can do all sorts of things. And you know, the proposal would be you would have one side chain with SegWit and Lightning and all that stuff. Another side chain with like 12 megabyte blocks or something ridiculous, right? Like you can have blocks that are huge if you want. And those side chains sort of get merge mined with the main chain. So they sort of have a lot of the same security properties. And you can just sort of let users choose, right? Let the market decide which solution they like better, and whoever uses like if you want to do Lightning and buy coffee with Bitcoin, you can go to that side chain and use Lightning Network there and do all sorts of stuff there. But if you just want to have more capacity, just go to the side chain and you know, you're good. And I actually thought that that's something that we should explore much more, just because it solves so many things in such an elegant way. But you know, I mean, there are sort of questions around side chains and how you do the two-way peg and things like that, how you make sure that it comes back properly and all this other stuff, that it you know, it hasn't quite gained the traction that I think it should have, given how many problems it solves. Yeah, so it's a great paper, and it turns out Paul Stork, he's worked on drive chains because he has another project called TruthCoin, and that's actually his Twitter name is TruthCoin, which is like this whole decentralized sort of platform for doing a lot of smart contracty stuff, and I see that as a very promising project once drive chains gets fully implemented, and it could bring a whole set of really interesting capabilities into Bitcoin that you know, that I think will find a lot of use.
Awesome.
I
have one question. So just consistent talk about Litecoin on my chat. So I will ask a question. What are your favorite projects? So other than Bitcoin, what other coins do you like, and do you like kind of like?
Okay, so I had to sort of study Monero for a variety of reasons, but I find the project very interesting. It incorporates a lot of stuff from Greg Maxwell's confidential transactions paper. And you know, it has a lot of privacy properties, so that's one that I find very intriguing. I do see some problems with it, like unbounded UTXO growth and things like that. But as a technology and all the math behind it, and the interesting things that they're doing with like range proofs and things like that, I find that absolutely phenomenal and interesting. So you know, if you're a cryptocurrency developer, say, that's like a lot of cryptos are just like copies of Bitcoin with a few modified things. Monero is nothing like that. It's completely different, and you know, like, you know, even it's like base 58 is its own like flavor of base 58, and like it just so many things are different about it, and you learn a lot looking at that. So I would say Monero is one of them. Another one that I really like is Decred, and I think that stands for decentralized credit or whatever. It's written by a bunch of guys that did BTCD. That's a project that I've contributed to. That's an alternate implementation of the core client, but it's written in Go. It's very clean, very readable, very easy to look at and like figure out what the hell's going on. Oftentimes that's not the case with a lot of the core code, because you know, it's inherited from Satoshi, who frankly wasn't was brilliant in putting pieces together, but wasn't the greatest C++ developer. So those guys that did BTCD, they made their own altcoin called Decred. It has probably the most innovative governance model that I've seen. You get these voting tickets if you do certain things and stake certain coins, and you get to vote on features that you want for the coin instead of having sort of like the scaling debate that we're having now on Bitcoin. So that itself is very, very interesting. There's a bunch of other features in there, and the developers are absolutely top notch. Dave Collins is one of the best developers I know. He's like an old BSD guy. He's like done kernel programming and stuff. So he's solid, very security conscious and things like that. And that whole team is very similar to them, to his way of thinking. See any other ones? I mean, there are some other interesting projects that are around. I don't know if they're until sort of they've proven themselves over time, or they have interesting technology that I want to look at. Maybe IOTA is one that I need to look at because the directed acyclical graph stuff. But yeah, I haven't looked into a lot of the stuff just because it takes a lot of my time, right? Like to really understand the coin, you need to really deep dive into it for at least 2 weeks before you can really understand it. And I feel like I owe it to myself to really understand it before I have an opinion on it. So it's a lot of coins that I haven't looked at. So
Exactly.
there you go.
I mean, I think I heard Charlie Lee in one of his interviews say before as well, when Bitcoin first started, you can just research the whole Bitcoin and the whole community in like an afternoon. But now everything's grown to a point where it really does take 2 weeks or months even to really fully understand a coin. And of course, shameless plug for Decred. Decred Assembly is a great YouTube channel as well. They interview a lot of people, and that's amazing. And on the chat as well, I'm going to ask one last question. I think, Ivan, do you have any more questions as well?
Yes, but I think we should wrap it up.
And then also, we will give the opportunity for Jimmy to plug anything you want. I think if you want to plug anything, Hypercoin up, and do that, I think it will be good. So my last question is the worst question ever. But are you Satoshi Nakamoto?
Who wants to know? Maybe.
Ooh. We have a contender here. Awesome.
No. I am not Satoshi Nakamoto. Unless you're, I mean, I'm more Satoshi Nakamoto than Craig Wright or Dorian Nakamoto. But yeah, I mean, come on now. It's kind of like one of those. I imagine this will be the deep throat question of our lifetime or our generation. So yeah.
All right, Ivan.
Right. Thank you very much, Jimmy, for joining us today. The time is 3:25 a.m. in London.
Wow.
I've been awake.
You are a trooper, man.
You're a
awesome.
trooper.
I've been awake for a very long time. I feel I should leave the office soon as well. Michael, do you have anything else?
I would. Let's go for Jimmy first. Do you have anything you want to plug? Hypercoin, anything?
The only thing I want to plug is my blog. I've been surprised at how popular it's been. I really didn't expect it when I wrote my first article back in like February. I want to thank all the readers and all the people on Twitter that are sort of promoting my articles and things and retweeting them and liking them. I would love to hear feedback about what sort of articles you want me to continue to write. And while I appreciate you guys wanting to donate or whatever, I'm not going to do that for now, although that may change in the future. Maybe I'll put up a Bitcoin address or something in the future, but for now, I'm not doing this for direct donations. I am doing this because I want Bitcoin to be healthy and for my investment to grow. So
awesome. That's a great
one.
Excellent. All right, so I think we're concluding this. Thank everyone for watching. We hit, I think, 700 something, almost 800 on my channel. So thank you guys all for watching this. And thank you all the viewers on Ivan's channel as well. Ivan, it's pretty amazing on your side as well.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much for all your questions.
And I do really appreciate what Jimmy's doing, because he's like a true, legit, old school Bitcoin developer who's coming out and speaking. And you know, a lot of times when I work with developers, they prefer writing good code to talking and communicating. And sometimes it's really important to communicate your thoughts. And I think that's one of the most important things that Jimmy's doing here. He's taking the time out, and this is an hour of crazy ass questions and crazy political questions as well. So I'm so sorry for throwing all these questions at you, Jimmy. Like, the Bitcoin questions are extremely hard, not just because they're hard to answer. I think hard to answer is easy, but the politics of it is just insane. And Bitcoin has gotten to a point where it is actually extremely political, and it's very hard to answer a question without stepping on someone's toes or without taking a side and getting half the Bitcoin community very angry at you. So thank you, Jimmy, so much for coming to this. I hope you can write more amazing articles, and hopefully we can bring you sometime in the future if something goes wrong or something goes well. I hope someday we can meet again and continue this conversation here. And thank you everyone for watching as well. So thank you guys so much. Any last words from you guys?
Well, thank you guys. You're way too kind, and you know, I enjoyed being on here. You guys are good interviewers. You're just sort of keep things moving and no awkward silences. Yeah, so it's been a pleasure being on.
Thank you so much. Oh, last question. I know a lot of people saying that I'm super excited about this, but do you ever get confused with the Dwayne Johnson, The Rock?
Who, me? I don't have his physique, so no.
All right, on that note, I think I'm going to stop the stream. Guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys. Thank you, Jimmy, for coming here. And thank you, Ivan, for staying up until 3 a.m. for this. This is absolutely insane. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, I'm going to do the same on my channel, and as Box Mining Michael said, we're very thankful to you, Jimmy. Thank you, everyone. All right, and we should be live on my channel. Okay. Welcome everyone to this session with Jimmy Song. Welcome, Jimmy, and we also have Box Mining.
Yeah.
And welcome to you as well. And we will just chat around for a few minutes before we get into the actual session so that more people can join.
Same here. So I am starting live right now, and I'm going live on my channel too. So welcome, Jimmy. Welcome, Ivan. And I'm
Thank you.
The most important thing is we need to make sure the volume is okay. So it's just my volume relative to your volume. So yeah, should be hopefully okay.
Seems fine to me, but I don't know. You guys figure it out.
Yeah, we have to ask the channel. That's because mostly yeah, I can't watch this either. I can't listen to the stream. Ivan, you can actually listen to the stream, right? Because if I listen, then it will actually go into the stream.
Yeah, sure. So I can take a look.
Awesome. So we're gonna start at exactly 9 o'clock.
Awesome. Do you have like a chat window for YouTube or something that I can look at? Just in case?
Yes, we do. You can come to. I'll send it to you on Skype.
Yeah, sure. All right, there we go, and
you can see a giant head.
Yeah.
So it's actually funny. People are asking me whether it's 3 a.m. in Sweden, but currently I'm actually in London, guys. And in London it is 2 a.m. and I am at the office where I work, and we have the security guy downstairs who is a bit suspicious of what's going on here. But Jimmy, so where are you based currently?
I'm in Austin, Texas.
Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
And there is 8 p.m. over there, right?
Yeah. Well, it's about to turn 8 p.m. Yes.
And Michael, you're in Hong Kong. What time?
Yeah, it's 8 a.m. here, so it's completely.
Yeah, your viewers should all know that that coordinating this is not easy. So, props to you guys.
I think we had to like ask each other like what time zone are you in, and we have to calculate everything. It's
yeah.
It's like the most inconvenient 3 time zones possible. But yeah, that's great though. I'm glad to be on the show with you guys.
Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
So, Michael, should we start?
Just give you a sec. So 2 more minutes. I'm gonna be time Nazi here, and start promptly at 9 o'clock.
But it is actually 2 o'clock a.m. for me. But maybe
Oh, really?
my clock is wrong.
Oh wait, maybe my clock is wrong. Okay. Okay, so I'll start then. I'll start. So what I'm gonna do, so I'm gonna introduce the format as well. So the format for this is we're gonna ask Jimmy some questions. The questions are available on the bottom, and then we're gonna do some questions and answers after. So we won't do, I kind of interrupt the main questions, but we'll try to get as many questions here and answered as possible. I will cut this a little bit to a shorter video, so if anyone wants to watch a shorter version, then I'm gonna cut it after we finish the stream. So with introductions first, so I'm Michael. Ivan is also another YouTuber, and Jimmy is a very prominent writer for Bitcoin, and also a Bitcoin developer as well.
Yes.
So Ivan, do you want to? Okay, so let's go introductions first. Jimmy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm a blogger. I'm a developer. I'm an entrepreneur. I've been doing Bitcoin for a while now. I got into it in like 2011. So this is my 6th year. It's kind of crazy how time flies by. It seems like it should be very young, but it isn't. Anyway, yeah, I currently work as principal architect at Paxos, otherwise known as ItBit. That's a Bitcoin exchange based out of New York.
Awesome. And my name is Ivan. You on my channel, of course, know me, but you on Mining channel, I do YouTube videos about blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and technology. I myself am a programmer. I currently work as an iOS developer in London. And very nice to be here with Jimmy and Michael from Box Mining.
Awesome. And my name is Michael. I do YouTube and also develop video games. So it's kind of like my thing to do daily cryptocurrency updates, and I also make video games on the side as well. So let's get started with the interview. So let's start with, why do we even need Bitcoin scaling in the first place? What is this whole thing about? Because this topic would be Segwit activation, but what is this whole problem? What is the problem here, Jimmy?
Well, so yeah, this is a much more complicated question than it seems on the surface. From a very basic standpoint, fees used to be something very close to zero, and it's been going up, and people have been complaining about it because if you're sending $5 and your fees are like 50 cents or $1, that's a significant percentage of the transaction, and that kind of sucks. And that was sort of like the beginning. Blocks were getting full. There was a 1 megabyte limit that Satoshi put in there back in like 2010 or so, and it's been there ever since. And it's a little bit frustrating if you're trying to get a transaction in, and you put something like a 25-cent fee, and it doesn't confirm for a while, and it wasn't working quite the same way that it was in previous years. And that was really the beginning of the scaling debate. And sometime around 2014, this topic became sort of the topic du jour in Bitcoin circles. And it's sort of, it's crazy to think that we've been debating this for 3 years, but we really have. And there were sort of 2 solutions put forward. One was, just increase the block size to 2 megabytes. The other was a very innovative and interesting way to do it via something called Segwit, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. But the essence of the debate comes to, how can we put more transactions, or how can we increase transaction capacity on the network? Largely because Bitcoin's getting more popular, and that's really where we're at.
And as you mentioned, Jimmy, Segwit is one solution, one possible solution to all of this. So if you would describe as simple as possible, what is Segwit? And without getting into too much of technical details, how would you describe it as simple as possible?
I don't know if it's possible to describe it without some technical aspect to it. But if you think about sort of like Bitcoin as sort of a giant ledger, And when you send money from one point to another, if I'm giving Michael some money, and in like a traditional bank, I would maybe write a check to him, right? And I would sign the check, and he would see it, and then the bank would debit my account and credit his account. Well, in Bitcoin, you have something very similar. You have transactions. I have certain transactions that I own, and I can sort of sign those over and create new outputs that I can give to Michael. That process of signing on a normal check, the actual part where you sign isn't very big, right? It's like a small corner of it. In a Bitcoin transaction, you can sort of think of it as like taking up like half the check, okay? And if you think of blocks as like a fixed size box where you can only fit a certain number of checks, if you could sort of cut the checks in half, you can sort of fit more checks in there. That's essentially what we're doing. The signature part of the check it takes up a significant part of the transaction. So what Segwit does is it sort of takes that away and puts it somewhere else. You can always verify it on your own. But you can fit more transactions, because you only have to see the signature once, and then you can sort of throw it away. And that's what segregated witness is. It's putting the signatures in another place and allowing more checks to fit in the box.
And so if we now take this to a more technical level, what kind of protocol changes need to happen in order to make this happen, and how can that affect the community?
Right. So from a non-upgrade, first of all, Segwit is something called a soft fork. So that means that it doesn't require everyone to upgrade. You only need some nodes that want to utilize this functionality to upgrade. And that means that that not everyone has to upgrade, so it has to be backwards compatible. And that means that everybody else that didn't upgrade sort of has to see something similar. And that's where a large part of the coding changes for Segwit is sort of like network messages. If you're sort of an old node, you'll get one set of messages. If you're a new node, you get another set of messages. So for example, blocks are communicated to old nodes as under the 1 megabyte limit. But to newer nodes, to ones that have upgraded, it's going to look like anything from anything up to 4 megabytes. It can be, and this is why core developers keep saying Segwit is a block size increase, because to a new node, when they get a serialized version of the block, it's actually like 2 megabytes or something bigger. And that's, it's just that the old nodes get communicated at 1 megabyte. And that's largely what the coding changes that are required. We are also sort of utilizing anyone can pay and all these other technical details. But I mean, essentially that's what it comes down to.
That's a really great description, actually, because this is actually, we need to go down into simple terms. So, okay, we see that this is removing a huge checkbox, a signature box, making everything smaller. Okay, now that we have all this cool technology, how do we actually upgrade the network? What's the process for that?
Yeah, so that's outlined in something called BIP 9. BIP stands for Bitcoin Improvement Proposal, and this was BIP 9 has been utilized for a bunch of other things like check sequence verifying, check lock time verifying, a bunch of other upgrades. But basically what it does is it says, hey, if you're mining a block, please tell us if you're ready for this upgrade. And they flip a bit. There's a bit assigned in the version field. And for Segwit, it's bit 1, which is not bit 0. Bit 0 is the rightmost one, and bit 1 is the one next to that. And basically, you signal that bit and say, hey, we're ready. And at once 95% of a 2016 block difficulty adjustment period says that they're ready, then there's another 2016 blocks where everyone, the remaining 5% presumably, has a chance to go upgrade, and then after that it's enforced, and that's how it's supposed to be done. Unfortunately, with Segwit, it's gotten to the point where it's only about 30 or 40% were signaling readiness, and thus, it wasn't getting activated. And this is where all this drama around user-activated soft fork and BIP 148 and BIP 91 even, and the New York agreement all come in.
So it's essentially like if you're an iOS developer, you're kind of trying to upgrade to the latest version of iOS, and everyone has to upgrade. See, that's the thing with the network. Everyone has to upgrade. So what we're saying is 95% of people have to upgrade before it gets locked in, before it becomes the law, right? So
yeah. Well, 95% of miners,
Yes.
and it's backwards compatible, so not everyone has to upgrade. It's just sort of a courtesy to the miners saying, hey, like, once 95% of you are ready, then we'll trigger. And that's sort of what they chose for BIP 9. It's a very conservative, very consensus-driven upgrade mechanism. But obviously didn't really work for Segwit, so that's where we are.
But so it's very interesting that you touch on this miner perspective. Well, if I'm a miner, why wouldn't I want to upgrade immediately to this new proposal?
Yeah, that's a great question. To some degree, sort of politics has come into it, and there are some miners that have been asking for 2 megabyte blocks and a hard fork, which is not backwards compatible, and they've been asking for it for a long time, and they just feel like their voices haven't been heard. There's a bunch of BIP proposals that have been made for hard forks to larger size blocks. That aren't really seeing the light of day, right? Like BIP 100, BIP 104, BIP 103, I think even 101 and 102. Most of those are just, larger block size solutions. No one's really championed them. Core doesn't seem really interested in merging any of them. So they've been very frustrated, and they've been using Segwit activation and saying, well, if you're not going to listen to us, then we're not gonna signal either. So that's kind of it's kind of become like this Mexican standoff with like both sides with guns to each other's heads or whatever. So that's where we've been for about 3 years. Yeah.
For 3 years. I thought it was only 1 year.
Well, the actual Segwit, but yeah, I mean, Hong Kong agreement goes back to early 2015, or is it 2016? But it's been around for a while. This debate, this sort of very acrimonious, and like I guess you can add like the censorship on our Bitcoin and all that stuff in there too. But it's been a very divisive community, I think, since this issue began, I think around 2014.
Oh, just horrible. So where are we at now? So we have something called user-activated soft fork, which sets a hard deadline on August the 1st. So what is user-activated soft fork, and what is this deadline?
Yeah. So user-activated soft fork is sort of a large group of possible forks that you can do, and they're basically it comes from the premise that every user is sort of master of their own node, right? Like every user can accept or deny whatever transactions or blocks that come into their node. And it's true. Every user has the right to reject whatever transactions they want, accept whatever blocks they want, reject whatever blocks they want. The thing is, if you are master of your own node and you don't agree with anybody, it's not really useful. No one's gonna take your coin, or it's not very useful in a community sense, because it's a blockchain. You